Some moments in life arrive without warning. They crash into our normal routines and change everything we thought we knew about the world. For the paramedics of Pine Valley Emergency Services, that moment came on an autumn morning when they discovered that sometimes the wildest creatures know exactly when to break the rules of nature. The ambulance's wheels hummed steadily against the mountain road. As Sarah checked the dispatch details one more time, it seemed like a simple call. Mrs. Peterson had fallen in her kitchen and needed help getting up. Nothing urgent, nothing they hadn't handled 100 times before. Mike kept his eyes on the winding road ahead, carefully navigating the sharp turns that local residents knew all too well. The morning fog clung to the ground like a thick blanket, forcing them to drive slower than usual. Their headlights carved through the dense mist, creating an almost tunnel-like view of the road ahead. The forest pressed in close on both sides, ancient pines standing guard like silent sentinels in the early morning light. The first hint that something was wrong came when a shadow moved through their headlight beams. Mike's foot instinctively moved to the brake pedal, but nothing could have prepared them for what emerged from the fog. There, standing directly in the middle of the road, was one of the largest black bears either of them had ever seen. Sarah's hand immediately went to the radio, ready to call in a wildlife hazard. But something stopped her. The bear wasn't acting right. Any other bear would have bolted at the sight of the approaching vehicle, disappearing into the safety of the forest. But this one stood its ground, its massive form blocking their path completely. Mike's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "Something's wrong," he whispered, voicing what they both felt. The bear was swaying back and forth, its head moving in an almost human-like gesture of distress. Its eyes reflected in their headlights, and what they saw there sent chills down their spines. There was intelligence in those eyes and something more, desperation. The bear took a step toward the ambulance, and every instinct told Mike to reverse. But then it did something that made them question everything they knew about wild animals. It raised its right paw, not in threat, but in an unmistakable gesture that looked almost like a human trying to wave someone down. Sarah had spent 15 years as a paramedic in these mountains. She'd seen bears before. They all had. But never like this. Never one that seemed to be trying to communicate. Never one that looked at an ambulance with what could only be described as recognition. The bear moved again, this time taking deliberate steps toward the driver's side window. Its movements were careful, almost gentle. Despite its enormous size, this wasn't aggression. This wasn't a territorial display. This was something else entirely. Something that would soon make them question everything they thought they knew about the barrier between the wild and human worlds. What happened next would change their lives forever. The massive bear pressed its paw against the ambulance's window, leaving a clear mark in the morning condensation. Its breath fogged the glass, creating an almost supernatural scene in the early light. Sarah and Mike sat frozen, their years of emergency training offering no protocol for this impossible moment. The bear's eyes never left them. These weren't the empty, wild eyes of a predator. They held something that shouldn't exist in nature, a clear, focused intelligence and an unmistakable plea for help. The animal's movements became more frantic, but not with aggression. It would take a few steps away from the ambulance, then return, each time looking back at them with those unsettlingly aware eyes. "This isn't normal," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over their racing hearts. Every wildlife training session they'd attended had emphasized the same point. Bears avoid human contact unless threatened or hungry. But this bear showed no signs of either. Instead, its behavior resembled something they'd seen countless times before, in humans desperately trying to get help. The bear's next actions removed any doubt about its intentions. It moved to the front of the ambulance, raised itself on its hind legs, and placed both paws on the hood. The vehicle dipped under its weight. Then, in a display that defied everything they knew about wild animals, it lowered itself and took several deliberate steps toward the forest before turning back to look at them. When neither paramedic moved, the bear returned and repeated the action. Each time it moved toward the forest, its movements became more urgent. It would take a few steps, look back, then return when they didn't follow. The pattern was impossible to miss. It wanted them to follow it. Mike's hand hovered over the radio. They should call this in. This was the kind of situation that demanded backup, animal control, maybe even the Department of Wildlife. But Sarah stopped him with a gentle touch on his arm. 20 years in these mountains had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, every instinct was screaming that this was different. The bear's behavior grew more insistent. It paced back and forth between the ambulance and the forest edge, its movements becoming increasingly agitated. Each time it returned to the ambulance, its eyes seemed to hold more urgency, more desperation. It would occasionally make soft grunting sounds, so unlike the threatening growls they'd been warned about in their wildlife safety courses. Time seemed to stand still in that mountain fog as human and animal stared at each other through the glass. The bear's chest heaved with exertion, its breath creating small clouds in the cool morning air. Its dark fur was matted in places, and now that they looked closer, they could see signs of distress in its posture and movement. Something was driving this creature to break every rule of nature, to seek out the very humans it should be avoiding. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The kind of wrong that would make a wild animal overcome its deepest instincts and approach an ambulance, of all vehicles, for help. Sarah reached for her medical bag in the back, her mind racing through possibilities. In all her years of service, she'd treated humans, dogs, even a horse once. But a bear? The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on her. Yet there was something in those eyes, something that spoke directly to her paramedic's oath to help those in need. The bear made one final, desperate attempt to communicate. It stood up again, its full height now visible, and let out a sound that was neither a growl nor a roar. It was something else entirely, something that sounded almost like a cry for help. Then it turned and took several determined steps toward the forest, stopping to look back one more time with an unmistakable message. Follow me. The decision went against everything they'd been taught. Every protocol, every safety guideline screamed against following a wild animal into the forest. But as Sarah grabbed her medical bag and Mike collected the portable emergency kit, they both knew they had no choice. Something was pulling them forward, something more powerful than fear. The bear kept a steady pace, always staying just far enough ahead to be visible through the morning mist. Its massive form moved with surprising grace between the trees, constantly checking back to ensure they were still following. The deeper they went into the forest, the more urgent its movements became. Their boots crunched on fallen leaves and broken twigs, the sound eerily loud in the morning silence. No birds sang, no small animals scurried through the underbrush. The forest itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. The fog hung between the trees like a living thing, making each step feel like walking into the unknown. Sarah checked her watch. 5 minutes into the forest. They should radio for backup. 10 minutes. The bear's pace quickened. 15 minutes, and the morning light barely penetrated the thick canopy above. The bear was leading them along what appeared to be a game trail, worn into the forest floor by years of wildlife passage. The air grew thicker, heavier with each step. The bear's behavior became more agitated. It would surge ahead, then wait impatiently, dancing from paw to paw in a display of obvious distress. Its breathing had become labored, not from exertion, but from what seemed like growing anxiety. 20 minutes into their journey, they began to notice signs that turned their professional concern into real alarm. Broken branches lined their path, not from natural falling, but from something large moving through in a hurry. Deep scratches marked several trees, fresh enough that sap still oozed from the wounds. The bear had made this journey several times, recently and frantically. The smell hit them next. Something subtle at first, but growing stronger. Something that made both paramedics exchange worried glances. Years of emergency response had taught them to recognize the metallic scent of blood, even faint traces of it. Mixed with it was another odor, one that spoke of pain and distress. Their guide suddenly stopped, its entire body tense. The bear turned to look at them, and in the filtered forest light, they could see tears matting the fur below its eyes. Such a human detail on such a wild creature sent chills down their spines. The bear let out a low, mournful sound that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath their feet. Just ahead, the trees opened into a small clearing. The fog was thinner here, and the morning light filtered through in weak beams. The bear stepped aside, as if inviting them to go first, its eyes filled with an intelligence that seemed impossible. It moved with the heavy certainty of someone leading others to something they know will change them forever. As Sarah and Mike stepped into the clearing, the bear's strange behavior suddenly made perfect, horrifying sense. What they saw there would haunt their dreams for years to come and forever change how they viewed the line between human and animal worlds. The clearing held a scene that drained the color from both paramedics' faces. There, in a shallow depression beneath a fallen tree, lay 3 bear cubs. 2 were motionless, their small bodies already still with death. But the third one was barely breathing, its tiny chest rising and falling in weak, irregular gasps. Around them, the ground was stained dark with blood, and scattered empty food wrappers told a devastating story. Sarah's knees went weak as the reality of the situation hit her. The cubs had found a campsite's discarded food, and with it, something deadly. Twisted metal cans lay scattered around them, their sharp edges gleaming dully in the weak light. One of the cans had been torn open, its jagged metal edges coated with dried blood. The cubs had cut themselves severely trying to get at the food inside, and from the looks of it, something in that food had poisoned them. The mother bear, the one who had led them here, moved to her cubs with such gentle care that it broke something inside both paramedics. She nuzzled the surviving cub, then looked up at them with eyes that contained a depth of pain no wild animal should be capable of showing. In that moment, they understood the full weight of what they were witnessing. A mother, watching her children die one by one, had somehow known that the humans in the big white vehicle with flashing lights were the ones who could help. Mike's hands shook as he opened his medical kit. The surviving cub was small, probably no more than a few months old. Its breathing was shallow, its gums pale, showing signs of severe blood loss. Around its mouth, foam mixed with blood indicated possible poisoning. What was even more shocking was how the mother bear moved aside, giving them space to work, as if she understood their purpose. The paramedics' training kicked in, overriding their shock. Sarah quickly assessed the cub's condition while Mike prepared emergency supplies. The cub had deep lacerations on its paws and mouth from the sharp metal, but the real danger was the poisoning. Empty containers of antifreeze lay among the trash, their sweet-smelling liquid a deadly trap for any animal that found them. The mother bear watched their every move, her eyes reflecting an intelligence that seemed almost supernatural. She made soft whimpering sounds, touching her nose to each of her dead cubs in turn, then looking back at the paramedics with such raw grief that it made them both catch their breath. This wasn't just animal instinct they were witnessing. This was a mother's desperate love, a love so powerful it had driven her to break every natural law to seek help from the very species that had caused this tragedy. Sarah's hands trembled as she checked the surviving cub's vital signs. Its pulse was weak and irregular, its small body growing colder by the minute. The mother bear's choice suddenly became crystal clear. She had watched her cubs falling ill one by one, powerless to help them. She had seen the white vehicles with flashing lights in town, had somehow understood they meant help. In her desperation, she had done the impossible. She had sought out humans, trusted them, led them here, all in a last desperate attempt to save her only surviving baby. The gravity of the moment hit them both. This wasn't just an emergency call. This wasn't just another rescue. This was a moment when the boundary between human and animal worlds had completely dissolved, leaving only the universal understanding of a mother's love and the desperate need to save a child. The mother bear stood guard, her massive form both protective and pleading as the paramedics fought to save her last surviving cub. Time seemed to stop in that small clearing, the fog wrapping around them like a protective cocoon. The only sounds were the ragged breathing of the dying cub, the soft whimpers of its mother, and the urgent movements of the paramedics as they worked. They knew they had to act fast. The cub was fading quickly, and they had no idea how long it had been since the poisoning began. Sarah's hands flew through her medical kit, pulling out supplies with practiced speed. Every second counted now. The antifreeze poisoning was shutting down the cub's organs, while the blood loss from the cuts made everything more dangerous. They needed to work fast, but they also needed to be careful. One wrong move could startle the mother bear, whose trust in them hung by the thinnest thread. Mike radioed for backup, his voice steady despite the situation. He called for wildlife services, a veterinarian, anyone who could help. But they were at least 30 minutes from the nearest help. The cub didn't have that long. They would have to do what they could with what they had. Sarah started an IV line, something she'd never imagined doing on a bear cub. The mother bear watched intently, her dark eyes following every movement. When the cub whimpered at the needle stick, she made a soft sound in her throat but didn't move. It was as if she understood they were trying to help, even though the process was causing pain. The complexity of treating a wild animal with human medical supplies forced them to adapt quickly. They had to estimate the cub's weight, calculate dosages meant for humans, and hope their decisions were right. One mistake could kill the cub faster than the poison. The pressure was immense, but their hands remained steady, guided by years of experience and the desperate need to save this innocent life. Time blurred as they worked. Mike monitored the cub's breathing, while Sarah pushed fluids and medicine through the IV. The morning fog began to lift, sending rays of sunlight through the trees to illuminate their desperate work. The mother bear remained a constant presence, alternating between watching them and gently nuzzling her dead cubs. The most challenging moment came when the cubs started seizing. Sarah and Mike exchanged alarmed looks. They had to act fast, but the wrong treatment could be fatal. Sarah made a split-second decision, adjusting the medication with a silent prayer that she'd made the right choice. The mother bear sensed their increased urgency, moving closer, her massive form casting a shadow over them as they fought to save her baby. Minutes stretched like hours as they worked, every moment a battle against time and nature itself. The cub's life hung by a thread, its fate resting in the hands of two humans who never imagined they'd be trying to save a bear cub in the middle of the forest, while its mother watched with an intelligence that defied explanation. The first sign of hope came as the sun reached its peak above the clearing. The cub's breathing steadied, its tiny body fighting back against the poison that had claimed its siblings. When the wildlife rescue team finally arrived, they found something unprecedented. Two paramedics and a mother bear working together to save a life, breaking every rule of the natural world in the process. Sarah and Mike stepped back, their uniforms stained with dirt and bear cub's blood, as the wildlife veterinarians took over. The mother bear remained calm, somehow understanding that this new group of humans was also here to help. Her trust, born of desperate need, had never wavered. Hours later, as the rescue team carefully transported the surviving cub for further treatment, the mother bear did something that would stay with both paramedics forever. She approached them slowly, her massive head lowered, and gently pressed her forehead against each of their legs in turn. It was a gesture of such pure gratitude that Sarah found tears streaming down her face. The story spread quickly through the emergency response community. Some called it a miracle, others a fluke. But for Sarah and Mike, it was something far more profound. They had witnessed a mother's love transcend the boundaries between species, had seen intelligence and trust in the eyes of a creature they'd been taught to fear. The event changed more than just protocols. It led to new training programs for emergency responders, focusing on wildlife encounters and the complex relationship between humans and the natural world. The clearing was cleaned up, the dangerous trash removed, and new measures were put in place to protect both wildlife and their habitats. But the most lasting change was in the hearts of those who were there that day. They had seen something extraordinary, a moment when the artificial barriers between human and animal worlds dissolved, leaving only the universal understanding of love, desperation, and the drive to protect one's children. In that forest clearing, they learned that sometimes the wildest creatures know exactly when to trust, and that miracles can happen when we're brave enough to trust them back. If you were moved by this incredible story of survival, hope, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Every week, we bring you amazing true stories that showcase the extraordinary connections between humans and animals. Hit that subscribe button to never miss another heartwarming tale of courage, compassion, and the remarkable moments that remind us just how special our relationship with wildlife truly is.